right. But I did venture some prayer which I've long since forgotten. But it was really an important moment. And that night, I can remember lying on the top bunk, and there was the little rustic cabin. There was a window right by my pillow. And I remember looking up into the starry skies and thinking about the marvel of it all, the miracle, just unbelievable. The stars in their courses, and God made all these things, and yet the message I'd heard that week that was that God so loved. And it hit me in a new way that, yes, even me. And that became really a significant turning point in my life. It turned, as I say, toward a deeper relationship. And then from that time and on through high school, you can believe that I went to church more than once a month. I was there every Sunday, got very involved in the youth program, became a leader in the youth program of my church, worked with other kids in the congregation, and we had a wonderful youth ministry going because of the things that happened in my life during that week. The other thing, and I'm sure Corinne will want to pick up on this, the other thing that they said to us that week at camp is that someday most of you will be married, and that person will be a very special person for you. And so as you think about the important things in life, you ought to begin now, and I was 14 at the time, you ought to begin now praying for the person that you may marry someday. And that was very important to me, and I began to do that. The other thing they encouraged me to do, which I want to say to you young people, was by far the most important thing to keep me in the Christian way. And that was to be regular in reading your Bible. Now, the family that I just described, with just 2 bedrooms and almost no privacy, it was hard to do. But what I would do is I'd stay up extra late at night, and after the rest of the family had gone to bed, I would spend some time reading my Bible. And I discovered that by doing that every day, even if I was so tired I could only read a paragraph, but I would try to read at least a chapter. And so during my high school years, from then and on, I read through the entire Bible, all the Old Testament, all the New Testament. And I'd have to say, looking back, that besides worship and the help of other people, that regular reading of Scripture and reflecting on what I was reading and regular prayers when I was 14, 15, 16 years of age was really the key for helping me to understand more profoundly what it meant to be a Christian. Now, you want to tell about praying for me when you didn't know me?
I did. I want to tell you about one thing before that. That was when I was maybe 12, I think. I think this is in order, chronologically. I had an infection in my face. I think it was from a zit, and I think I picked it. Anyway, I didn't want anybody to know about it, and I tried to keep it a secret, but it started to hurt terribly, and I ended up in the hospital with a terrible infection. And I can remember taking antibiotics, and I remember then how it emptied and how then it healed. But the doctor told me that if I hadn't have gotten there when I did, he said that could very easily have gone to your brain, and you may not have lived. That was really a shattering experience for me, and to think of the, kind of close call it was. And I had such a feeling that God has spared my life, and it must be for a special purpose, and I want to know what that special purpose was. By that time in my life, I was, as he's described, reading the Bible every day and praying, and it was a very important part of my life. This was a very big experience for me. And then it was in Bible school. We went to vacation Bible school for 4 weeks. I bet you think that's back in the dark ages. I was in 7th grade at the time, and I can still remember a beautiful June day sitting on the steps of this little white country church my friend when our teacher came and sat down beside us just to talk. Now, she was a very special person. She was crippled with arthritis. She had had this happen to her as a very young person, and she had hands that were just gnarled, and her feet were gnarled, and she wore funny shoes because of it. But she was one of the most radiant Christian people I had ever known, one of the happiest people I'd ever known, and I thought if anybody had reason to be discouraged, she should have reason. Because you know how you like to be as beautiful as you can, and you don't like any zits, or you don't like any kind of thing that's abnormal. Well, it was just a lesson to see that this person could overcome handicaps and be so happy. And you could sense how close she lived to God in the Bible. She was just happy and radiant every day about the promises of God, and we could tell how much she loved us. Well, this day, when she sat down while we were eating our lunch on the front steps of the church, she said to us, have you ever thought about praying for the person you'll marry someday? I mean, if I had, I wouldn't have admitted it. I certainly thought about a person, but I didn't talk about it. And she said, well, you should start now, because that person is someplace. And just imagine the adventure of starting to pray for that person wherever they are, every day until you meet that person. And she said, it will make a difference on how you conduct yourself, saving yourself for that person someday. And I was very shy. I just mostly listened. I don't think I said anything. But I certainly heard what she said. And that night was the first night I prayed for Herb Chilstrom. I didn't know who he was or where he was, but I knew that God knew. And I began that day and every day since then until I am now 58 years old. I was 12 then. So I've been praying for this dear person to me every day, all of those years. Well, that was special because I always envisioned a person. And when I got a little older, I think I was 16 when I had my first date. I knew that wasn't the one I was praying for. And when I was 17, I went kind of steady with somebody. But I knew it wasn't the person I was going to marry. And that had a very definite effect on our relationship. And I went with several people. And always I thought, I don't think this is the one. But I do remember I went to Bible school in Minneapolis after I graduated from high school. And I had stayed home that fall term because my mother had surgery, and I stayed home to help her. When I got to Bible school in January, I met several people the first days, and I got a telephone call. And he said, this is Herb Chilstrom. I don't know if you remember me. And I said, well, are you real tall and blonde with blue eyes? And he said, yes. I said, yes, I remember you. And guess where we went on that date? By streetcar to a church. Our kids think that's hilarious. What have they ever done but gone to church, they think. But I do remember when I came in that night thinking some thoughts. I just wonder, maybe, if this is the one that I have been praying for. I hadn't really ever thought that about anyone I had dated before. And those were, we went together kind of off and on. I got waylaid with someone else for a while. But I thought, no, come to your senses. And we were married about 4 years then after our first date. But what I want to say to you in telling that story is that it's very special for you. Not only to pray for the person you'll marry, but it has everything to do also with God's purpose for you. Because as you pray for your mate, it ties you up with, well, God, what is it you want me to do? And is there something we can do together that will bring glory to your name? And so I would encourage all of you to think about that. Maybe some of you will not get married, but to pray for God's purpose for you, whatever it is, and for your relationships, because God wants to be a part of that, and God has a will for every one of you in a very, very special way.
We just pause a moment on the point she's been making, because I know we run the risk of sounding horribly old-fashioned, but I don't care. I'm going to say it anyway. And that is, it's worth waiting until you say in public, in the presence of God to someone, I will, before you go to bed with that person, to put it very bluntly. Sometimes people think, well, pastors must be not very interested in sex. Okay? Well, believe me, pastors are normal human beings, and pastors enjoy sex as much as anyone else, and pastors face the same temptations as anyone else, and so you don't categorize us as very normal in that way. But I really want to warn you against, what is almost taken for granted now. Pastors tell me that the majority of those who come for marriage now are already living together. And the philosophy, of course, is that if you get acquainted a bit that way, it'll make for a better marriage. Not true. And the studies are now very clear that there's no advantage whatever. In fact, some studies indicate it's a disadvantage to commit yourself in that way to another person. And my plea for you as you think about this, if you are one who will marry someday, is to remember that you really can't have a long-term, really satisfying, passionate sexual relationship unless that person is also your friend. And I question whether you can become a friend in a deep and profound sense if your first priority when you meet that person is to have sex with that person. Let me illustrate. I'll use a pseudonym, but it's a real person. We'll call her Susie. I know her well. She went off to college a year ago last fall. When she arrived in the town where she was going to school, she met a guy from her hometown. She thought he was pretty neat. He thought she was pretty neat. And he was living alone. She thought, I could save some money. She moved in. Of course, they moved into a sexual relationship immediately. In other words, they went to bed immediately and lived together for several months. And he kind of ran out of money, went back to the hometown. When she came back last summer, it seemed like he didn't really have much interest in her. And she really felt crushed by that. And now she's wondering whether she paid too heavy a price for something. I think that's a good example of how if you begin and move into that relationship that quickly, you're going to have trouble. We don't regret for one moment having had time, 4.5 years off and on, when we could build a relationship of friendship, a mental and a spiritual relationship, and then out of that have more than 35 years of a full relationship, including a sexual relationship. So I just plead with you to resist the trend and to think very deeply and carefully about that person, even though you don't know that person yet, because believe me, it is worth it. I would take a different direction now and talk a little bit about my calling, because you may think, well, if you're bishop, maybe God just said one day, you're going to be a pastor and then you're going to be a bishop, and it was written in the skies. Well, it didn't work that way. In fact, I first began to think about being a pastor when I was at that Bible camp when I was 14 years old. But it took 4.5 years, 5 years before I was ready to say publicly, I'm going to be a pastor. It was like a flower that opened very, very gradually. There were no lights, no specific signs. It was kind of a deep feeling that my life should move in that direction. So after 1 year out of high school, I was able to say to my friends and family, yes, I'm going to prepare to be a pastor. Going to college was not easy for me coming out of that kind of family background because there was no money. But one of the good things that happened to me, and a very important part of my faith journey that I'm talking about around the country today, these days, is that when I was about 16, when I was exploring how does one live out the Christian life, there came a suggestion. I think it was through a pamphlet, I don't even remember, but a suggestion that one joyful way to live out your Christian life was to return to the Lord at least 10% of what you receive. So I'm working at the dry cleaners after school every day, and every week I put in the offering plate exactly 10% of what I had earned that week. And I kept doing that, even though I thought to myself I should be putting this money in the bank to go to college because I'm going to need all of it. But I kept doing that and kept doing it all the way through college. Sometimes I had 3 part-time jobs in order to pay the tuition and the room and board. But I found that it worked. It was kind of like a miracle, but it always worked. If I would just set aside that as my first commitment. I'm not suggesting you do it in a legalistic way, or to think that, okay, if I give 10%, God's going to just flood me with, I'm going to win the lottery or something like that. No, do it because you want to share in the work of the church and the kingdom, and do it because, as has been my experience, and the same true for Corinne, you will find that it's just a very joyful way. And now, as I think back over the years, my salary is a good one now, but it hasn't always been that way. Most of my ministry, low pay as a college teacher and a small town parish pastor, was able to do that, and it's just been incredible how even on a relatively low salary most of these years, we have been able to do this. And now at this point in life, to go well beyond the tithe is really a wonderful thing. And I just want to take advantage of that, because if you tell someone who's 50 to do that, they think impossible. Can't be done, it is hard. If you start doing it now and develop the pattern, you will find that it really can work. How are we doing for time? Are we up? We're just, who's in charge here? How much more time do we have? 5 or 10 minutes. Where should we go from here? I'll turn it back to you.
Along the journey of life, I think that we tend to idealize, especially when we're in adolescence. And we can't be a normal teenager without having ideals of what we expect will happen to us. But somehow those expectations begin to take over, and then if we lose the expectations, sometimes we can just do a boomerang and really get low. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about some of those kinds of experiences. Dreamed of getting married and maybe having 4 children, and lots of dreams. But when it happened that we were married and discovered that I could not bear children, for me especially, that was a dreadful loss. I didn't know how to handle it, and I got very angry at God. I mean, in his family, they had 8 children, and in my family, 5. Actually 6, because I had a younger sister who died right after birth. But never had we thought of, that kind of a loss of expectation. And it took a long time to work through that. But God is with us at those kinds of times. And finally, after getting all the anger out to God and letting God fill me again, I was ready for a new stage of life. And that was when we began to look at adoption. And it was a great joy when we were able to adopt 2 children, and a special bonus when we could adopt a 3rd child. We had not expected ever to be able to get a 3rd child. So we had some very happy years with our children growing up, and very normal children, and had lots of fun, and somehow it all seemed very special after going through the thought of not having any children. It's a biological urge to have children. And so so we were happy that this could happen. But things don't always go as we expect. We expected that we would get old and have our 3 children, and it hasn't happened that way, because we had the sudden death of our son when he was 18 years old. And I don't even know how to describe that experience of sorrow so deep that it paralyzed and immobilized me. I'm speaking only my part of it now. I remember being in shock and feeling so numb. I remember one night, it was the night we had made his funeral plans and picked out a casket, which is a terrible, terrible experience for a parent. And I can remember coming back to the house. There were friends that had come from 200 miles away. His sister from South Carolina and her family were there, and a sister from California were there. And that whole night, I felt so numb. I didn't have any feelings at all. I felt dead once. I have never before or since had the terrible experience of no feelings at all. The loss of an expectation and the sorrow that you live with really never goes away when you lose a child. I don't think any of you kids can even guess how important you are, not only to your parents, but also to your friends and to God who made you, and how important your life is. And I want to share with you that even at such a terrible time in life, to discover that God is there for you. God is your friend. God is weeping with you and will sustain you to resurrection and new life. Whatever happens to you in your life, nothing is so difficult that God cannot see you through to a new day. But you will need, besides God, you will need special friends. I'm so thankful for special friends who have hugged us and who have accepted us with whatever bizarre feelings we've had through this grief experience, and have hugged us and loved us back to new life again, to feel the surge of life, the preciousness of life again. And that's a very special message I want to give you, that when you lose an expectation, when you have bad times, let God love you, and let those people around you love you back to resurrection and new life again.
I think maybe I'll just wrap up with a couple of comments, which is really an extension of what Corinne has opened up here, and that is God's purpose for your life. Remember a poster, that said, "God don't make junk," and it's a way of saying that every single one of you is really important to God. And I also am convinced that no matter if you're extremely brilliant or very average or even below average, that God has a purpose for your life. There's something that is useful that you can do with your life. We say it's your calling. And the important thing, my judgment, is just to be open and let God lead you and guide you and direct you to where your life can be most satisfying. I have to tell you, I have not yet been where I expected to be ever in my life. Once I went to college and decided to be a pastor, when I got near the end of my seminary career, they told us where we had to go in the church into which I was ordained. And they sent me to a place which I did not want to go. I just didn't want to be there. But I went because I thought, well, maybe they know God's will better than I do. And I had 4 wonderful years in that place, a little 2-point parish in northern Minnesota. And now we go back there. We have a lake place there. We just love the area. I would have missed that if I hadn't been open to God leading me through the church. And I never expected to teach. But one day the phone rang and said, we want you to teach at this small 2-year college out in New Jersey, right across from New York City. That's the last place on earth I wanted to go. But I couldn't turn it down. I tried, but I couldn't. I just had to go. I went there, and that opened the door I never expected. I never thought I would ever be anything but a parish pastor, because that's what I wanted to be. But then a door opened to go to graduate school. Never expected I'd ever be able to earn a doctor's degree, but was able to do so while I was teaching. And then another door opened, very unexpectedly, to go to an exciting parish in the Midwest congregation. I was just having a ball there. And after 6 years, suddenly I go to a Synod convention, and boom, you're elected the bishop of the Minnesota Synod. I certainly hadn't planned on that. And there's nothing to seek, as your bishop can tell you. That we have a saying that those who seek it deserve it. And it wasn't something I wanted, but it came, and I accepted it as God opening the door. And then after 11 years of doing that, ended up in Columbus, Ohio, and elected bishop of the ELCA. And again, really overwhelming. But one thing I've learned through these unexpected happenings is that the most important thing is to live in relationship with Jesus Christ and to be ready to go and to do what the Lord directs us to do. It isn't always easy. In fact, sometimes it gets extremely complicated. But I do believe that in this relationship, God will have a way of opening a door for you. When I was your age, we used to think, well, you just choose your occupation, and that'll be your calling for life. It's no longer that way. Some of you will have 3 or 4 or 5 different occupations in the course of life. You may major in one subject in college like our 2 kids did, and neither of them are in the field in which they majored. And maybe they never will be. And that's a very different world in which you live. But I still believe it's extremely important for you to be in a prayerful relationship where you're open and ready to lead in the direction God is guiding you. The most important thing, of course, being that we see ourselves again from our baptism as people who are called to live in a relationship with God and to be ready to serve the world in whatever way God directs us. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We could tell you all kinds of other things, but I think that's enough for now. It's a bit of our story, and please hear from us our deep concern that your story will also be one in which, through the ups and the downs, you will sense the presence of God and live in a relationship with Jesus Christ. Thank you very much.
Both very much. I ask you now to go to the second session, and then remember, please, if you will, when it's dinner time, you will remain outside the fellowship hall at the doors, and we will bring you in. Thank you.
Any subject, gun control, abortion, homosexuality, war and peace, you find the whole spectrum in most every church, as you would in ours.
I have a potentially bigger can of worms that I'd like to ask about. I have followed the articles in the Lutheran about several homosexual couples who are seeking ordination in the WELCA, and have read of the upset versus the, for lack of a better word, open-mindedness, and wonder if the WELCA has come...
Leave the W out.
Okay. I'm sorry. Forget what group I'm in.
That's right.
I have to remember who I'm talking to. But what is the church's position on that in terms of ordination, because part of me says and was raised that if someone has a true calling from God, who am I to argue with that? The other half of me